Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. How are you doing this morning? Good. Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us here early. And I hope you enjoyed the video because my team helped put that together. So I think it really summarizes the issue at hand for this panel very nicely. And when we think about Asia, it's undergoing such unprecedented change at the moment, facing rapid urbanization, resource scarcity, as well as accelerating climate change. And really, we really need to change the way that we work, play, and live for Asia to thrive and be prosperous at the same time as solving its environmental and social challenges. And so when I think about innovative business models, I see a huge challenge and opportunity. And we are very, very privileged to have a really diverse set of panelists this morning to kind of share with us what are some of the innovative business models that are enabling this transformation. So we've heard yesterday about the circular economy and how that is really kind of changing the linear way that we work. At the moment, we're taking, we're making, and we're wasting. But really, the future is circular. It's where we put all the materials back into the economy. It's where we share our assets, and we actually disrupt the way that we work. So I'd like to first invite Sharon. Mobike is a mobility platform, and obviously it's brought cycling back to more than 200 cities worldwide. Yeah. And you have a really interesting business model. So please share with us, and then I'll invite each of the speakers to share their thoughts before convening a question and answer. And I hope you participate by also submitting your questions on Slido. Sharon.
Thank you, Jessica, and good morning, everyone. It's such a great pleasure to join the panel discussion today. And I learned so much from other panelists yesterday, and hopefully that we can make today's session more interactive, and we all have some insights like getting away from this panel discussion. So I think I have some slides that we can present to the audience. Just by a show of hands, how many of you have heard of Mobike before? Oh, great. Okay. Just to allow me to have a quick introduction. Mobike is, to date, the largest smart bike sharing system in the world. Just to give you a quick introduction, smart bike sharing system, bike sharing isn't a new concept, but smart bike sharing is a new invention. So you don't have to own a bicycle, you simply need to download the application Mobike, and you can use the application to scan the QR code at the smart lock. It's very nice that organizers help to put a bicycle on the stage. It looks very sexy. So you simply need to unlock the bicycle, and you can just park it at a designated location. Either it's demarcation on the ground or it's a bicycle rack, and just lock it at a destination. So it adds a lot of flexibility and ease of use, and that's why it really gains its popularity in a lot of countries. That's why today, maybe you can go to the next slide. Okay, so right now we are operating in 19 countries and 200 over cities. So over 200 million customers around the world have already used Mobike to cycle over 18 billion kilometers, reducing 4.4 million tons of carbon emissions, which is equivalent of taking off 1.2 million cars off the road for a year. I think these are very impressive and very encouraging numbers to share. And with 9 million bicycles and 30 million trips happening every day, Mobike has already become a major public transportation complement. So we, through survey and the white paper that we have published, we noticed that this is really increased the use of public transportation as well, because almost like 70% of the people that we surveyed told us that they actually think that having Mobike as part of the alternative transportation solution, they feel like going to MRT stations and going to bus stops is so much easier, and help them to use the car a lot less. So instead of taking the conventional bicycle from the market, we put a lot of effort in designing our own bicycle with the intended lifespan of 4 years. So for example, the 5-spoke wheel, we literally reinvented the wheel. and the airless tires, and the transmission system that ensure no chain jumps. So every bicycle is equipped with a smart lock and always reporting to us the location and the trip history at the back end. So with the big data analysis, we are able to tell where the demand is, where the supply is, to ensure that bicycles are being turned over more efficiently, because bicycles are supposed to be ridden. They're not supposed to be left on the road idle. So by increasing the efficiency and turnover of the bicycles, really help us to adopt a more responsible and a more responsible way of operations. So every day there is a 40 terabyte of data being transmitted to the back end, and really help us to manage our operations in a very efficient manner. For example, from the back end, we know that exactly where are the bicycles that is not being ridden for the past 24 hours, for example. Then we'll send our operators to relocate them to the hotspot so that people would be able to have access of bicycles when they need to use them. And all parts of the bike can be recycled. This is the big data backend system that we use. And we also launched this new program, which is called Mobike Life Cycle Program. All parts of the bike can be recycled. Each bike model is more environmental friendly than the last model. We estimate that without significant change, by 2020, more than 10 million shared bicycles across the bike share industry will need to be recycled, which, if we don't do anything about it, that will be 160,000 tons of waste to the planet Earth. To ensure that we best prepare to address this issue, Mobike is investing more than $450 million into the new Mobike Lifecycle Program to reduce, reuse, and recycle bike components. Through the partnership with leading companies like Dow Chemicals, we make sure that all the parts of the bicycles is recycled, either as components of new bikes or as the raw materials. And we are also very honored to receive the award from UN Environment recently as the champion of the earth, and for the contribution of the environment and focus on the concept of reduce, reuse, and recycle. And I think there is a small video clip that I would like to play at the end of the presentation. So, to summarize the life cycle program.
This is a Mobike that hit the road in April 2016. It's already experienced spring, summer, autumn, and winter. It's travelled 5,860 kilometres with 2,960 people. Wear and tear has taken its toll, but it will still shine in many ways. Its smart lock will be passed on to share its wisdom. Its wheels will be refurbished and will continue to carry Mobikers on their journeys. The solar panels will be repaired and will continue to energise rides. Many parts will be recycled. They may pave our way forward, protect our homes and windows and doors, or even protect us from the rain in umbrellas. Every Mobike is designed to be more environmentally friendly than the last. Let's cycle together to a greener city and a greener world.
Thank you very much, Sharon. We'll come back to you in a minute, but I just want to go to Edwin now, who is the Head of Sustainability and Communication for Industry Asia. Share your thoughts.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm a little bit old school and also a little bit old, so I've resorted to using paper, but I assure you it's on recycled FSC certified paper. So I just have a couple of slides to share on Food Industry Asia. But never mind, let me just talk you through it. So we were formed in 2010, we're based in Singapore, and essentially we focus on four main areas: food safety, health and nutrition, trade harmonization, and sustainability. And we work very closely with national industry associations, with governments, with international organizations and academia. So part of the work we do, centers a lot on policy, a lot on regulatory affairs, but we also do a lot of studies and research and reports because we believe in our industry that data and information and science-based programs should be quite key. Here goes the flipping. So why did we get involved, or how did we get started on this journey on sustainability and on specifically on plastics and packaging? So we recently launched or completed, and it's on our website, a 4-country study on tackling plastics and packaging waste in Southeast Asia. It covers Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, and the Philippines. And essentially, we wanted to look at what were the issues in these countries and how the industry, the food industry could, what role can we play? So it looks basically at, again, country-specific data, and it provides us with a fact base to guide our actions and hopefully to develop tailored and more effective solutions. So coming back to today's theme on how the food industry is innovating to fight against plastics. I think for me, innovation, we should look at it in 3 parts. So we've got your upstream innovation. So that's where, the typical packaging redesign and looking for alternative materials to plastics. But you also have to look at the downstream innovation, which I think at the moment, and is quite applicable to many of the countries in Southeast Asia, is your collection, your material sorting, and how do you make recycled plastics much more recyclable. And it comes with also policy. I think policy innovation is also quite important to string all these things together. And I'm glad in the UN environment video that we've just watched, it talks a lot about green procurement. It talks a lot about even like sustainability labels. These are quite important. But just coming back to the food industry, so individual companies, they are already spending quite a lot of time and resources on innovation. You take Tetra Pak, for example. They are not quite a food company, but very closely related to food companies. They launched the first fully renewable package using bio-based coating. They've also gone through a lot of effort to reduce the number of layers in their packaging. And I think they've also introduced the Tetra Top, separable top from their box cartons, so you can actually easily tear off the top parts, and it helps in the recycling process. Unilever, for example, also introduced their Creosol, which helps in the recycling of sachets, which again, in this part of the world, it's something that you see quite often. And also recently, McDonald's and Starbucks have jointly collaborated on a recyclable and compostable cup. So that's something that the industry is really focused on. We, FIA as an industry, together with Singapore's Economic Development Board, so government, and leveraging on Singapore's technology and R&D environment, we've put together a circular materials lab. In fact, the first get-together is tomorrow. If you would, it's a bit like speed dating. We want to accelerate the whole process of innovating new materials and, again, improving the recyclability of plastics. So we've brought together the materials guys from the brands, we've brought together the materials scientists from the research institutes, and we've brought together technology companies who are into the food space to come together, crack their brains. We've issued them a couple of problem statements to solve, and we want them to come back maybe in 3 months and 6 months. And the guarantee to them is that the companies are there to take on the ideas and the prototypes, and therefore you probably will have that strong business case and the market there. But at the end of the day, I think recycling technology, as well as the availability of high-quality plastics that can be used again for food-grade packaging has to be there, as well as regulations. I mean, just looking at Southeast Asia, there are varying regulations in terms of the reuse of recycled plastics for food-grade packaging. So that's something that perhaps we want to work with the governments, both at a national level but across Southeast Asia, so that there's a bit more of a standardization that can help the whole value chain. And I think the policy bit is quite important, and this is an area that I'm quite passionate about, being a former policy maker myself with the Singapore government. And again, going back to green procurement, I think that's a very important lever that governments can use to drive sustainable actions, both from the manufacturer point of view as well as from the consumer point of view. And just for example, a couple of years ago, we did that in Singapore. We went to the government. I was with an environmental NGO at that time. We went to the government and we told them that basically you guys have to take the lead in driving sustainability. And one way you can do it is just to recalibrate your procurement process, where instead of looking just at pricing as the key criteria to awarding contracts, you look at the sustainability part of the products that you're procuring. And I think that sends a very powerful message, because as we've heard from Mr. Agarwal from India yesterday, that public procurement is worth trillions of dollars. And so it's big business for businesses. And if the government makes that very public statement or signal, I think it will help to drive many companies, including those in the food industry, to really think about innovating and being much more sustainable, not just in producing, but also the end of product life, recycling and things like that. So I think the other policy tool, if I can call that, that has been brandished around this region is EPR. It's worked quite effectively in Europe. I think the time might have come for it to be introduced here, but we as an industry, we're quite cautious that EPR doesn't become TPR, total producer responsibility. And we do like the idea from NGO in Indonesia, which was founded by some of our members. They have mooted the idea of ESR, extended stakeholder responsibility, which is what we like, because it takes into consideration everyone in the value chain who is responsible. And the second thing about EPR, or the variation of it that you want to call it, is that the fees collected should go back to the system, to supporting and incentivizing innovation, infrastructure development, and not go into some general revenue account or to help balance the budgets. So that's the other part that we want to talk about. And so I think for us, there are a few concluding points I'd like to share, and I think I'll probably be short out of this room because of the nature of this topic. So while we agree that plastics is a problem, we tend to feel that it's not the problem, or it's not the only problem. I think the larger issue, especially for the region, and based on our study, and a lot of other people have shared this, is that you really have to look at it from the solid waste management point of view, because the infrastructure is sorely lacking here in the region, and that's an immediate area and an urgent area that needs to be fixed, because innovation will take some time, and especially when you talk about food packaging, it has to go through testing and approvals and all that. So we really should look at the bigger picture, and hopefully not be too caught up with images and emotions. And so while brands individually and collectively, we as an industry, we're looking at ways to reduce plastics, and we're investing in product packaging innovation, I think more must be done to enhance infrastructure and to facilitate the proper disposal and recycling and reuse of packaging.
Thank you very much, Edwin. That was most interesting. I think you've kind of articulated a lot of interesting policy tools, as well as innovation in materials that is prompting new business models, enabling brands to fight plastic use and pollution. I want to come to Win now from the Sustainable Rice platform. Rice is obviously a very important staple in ASEAN and in Asia. So, what does it take to green one of the most eaten commodities?
Well, thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and may I start with an experiment? This is a 1 kilogram of jasmine rice that I bought yesterday. Can anyone in this room tell me how much water was used to produce this 1 kilogram of rice? Let's have a guess. Let's have some guesses. 100 liters of water? 3,000 liters. Dirk, you're a star. But you've been doing your homework. This is an educated audience. Most people, when I ask this question, underestimate the amount of water needed grossly. In fact, it's between 1,500 and 6,000 liters per kilogram of water. And, you know, in Western societies, we are Philistines when it comes to rice. You know, we know very little about what went into its production, the vulnerability of rice to climate change, the impacts of rice on climate change. So what I wanted to start off with is by linking rice production to global food security. You know, rice is pretty much the staple for half the world's population. It provides 90% of the calories in this world. And it is also the staple for 70 to 80% of the world's poor. So it's a really critical crop for global food security, not just in the ASEAN region. And by 2050, it's fully expected that we are going to end up with something like a 20% shortfall in global rice production compared with projected demand, according to the Asian Development Bank. So, you know, we are going to need to intensify production on a declining resource base, on a declining land base. We're going to have to use more chemicals to produce that yield. And there is a declining land area. So how do we, you know, address, you know, the sustainability challenges that inherent in that dilemma? We have, for example, I mentioned, you know, rice uses about 30 to 40% of the world's fresh water resources. Rice accounts for about 10% of global methane emissions, 13% of global fertilizer production. Now, these are quite big figures, and all of them impact on carbon footprints, of course. So, you know, it's really critical, therefore, that we look now at how we can minimize the carbon footprint, the environmental footprint of rice production as we move to address that food security shortfall in the future. Okay, so how do we transform the rice sector so that we can reduce chemical inputs, reduce water use, and mitigate emissions in the rice sector? We've already made the very first step, actually, just this now. Increasing awareness is, of course, the very first step towards long-term change. And we already had a bit of a discussion on water use to produce that 1 kilogram of rice. So when we talk about sectoral transformation, what does it really take? Well, you need to define the problem, first and foremost. You need to have a commonly accepted definition of what we mean by sustainability in rice. Then we need to be able to measure it, and second, and lastly, most importantly, to incentivize its adoption on a broad scale. And don't forget, we have 140 million rice farmers, very, very fragmented production around the world, mostly 90%, of course, in Southeast Asia, South and Southeast Asia. So the Sustainable Rice Platform was established in 2011 by UN Environment and the International Rice Research Institute, which is based in the Philippines, and private sector players, bringing in other stakeholders such as a number of governments and civil society actors. So we've grown from, when I joined actually 5 years ago, we had I think 15 members. Now we have 95 institutional members spanning the whole of the stakeholder caucus, if you like. So, and, you know, this is really important because it allows us to operate in a pre-competitive space, and unlike perhaps my fellow panelists who are actually working, you know, in commerce. We are working, you know, to co-create public goods and make them available and provide access as public goods to as many farmers as possible and create markets for them. So what we've done is to develop and launch a couple of years ago the world's first sustainability standard for rice. together with a set of indicators that allow us to measure progress. Now, unlike many voluntary certification standards that have come before, this is not a standard that's aimed at compliance per se. It is a standard that, because some of these compliance standards have been accused of marginalizing non-participants. So we want to be inclusive. We want a standard that can reward progress, that can serve as a definition for sustainability for policymakers, a normative basis for policymaking, that can also serve the supply chain to help them provide assurance services, assurance certification and verification services to serve their markets. So, it's the standard and the indicators that we have developed have been quite broadly accepted. In fact, on the day that we launched it, Mars Food announced its global commitment to 100% sustainable sourcing of its Uncle Ben's rice, whom we've all heard of, by 2020. So that is an amazing commitment that has been followed by a number of other organizations. So the SRP standard as a public asset, it's a working definition of sustainability that we can use. It will evolve. And it's a tool for governments, it's a tool for the private sector, it's a tool for civil society to benchmark the sustainability of any rice system, tropical, temperate, flooded, dry land, whatever you like. So we can compare the sustainability, for example, of an organic rice system to an intensive system, according to a benchmark that is agreed by governments, by civil society, and by the industry. So I think that is quite a compelling case, to drive broad-scale adoption. So we want overall to use these tools to embrace technological innovation. International Rice Research Institute, it provides us with that technical underpinning, to reduce emissions, to optimize resource efficiency, and enhance equity. We've tested the standard in about 12 countries across Asia, but also in Brazil, in Australia, and in Spain. And broadly speaking, all of these implementations have come to the same broad conclusions that you reduce, by adopting the standard, you reduce chemical inputs by around 10 to 20%. You reduce water use by the same amount. And you actually increase the farmer's profitability by between 10 and 15%. So the fact that these results have all been achieved in very, very different production contexts is really significant. And it gives us confidence that we are actually on the right track here. So I would like to probably stop there, but I just wanted to say one thing. Perhaps our biggest challenge moving forward in terms of disruptive innovation is to move beyond certification. To have an auditor go to a field once a year with a clipboard and make an assessment based on what the farmer tells him, it seems to be a very antiquated and flawed process for guaranteeing the legitimacy or the provenance of a crop. Wouldn't it be better if you could use ICT solutions to collect a lot of data, generate a season-long engagement with the farmer, and ensure that you are communicating in both ways, in both directions with the farmer, and reaching many more of them, using ICT tools, using GIS applications, Internet of Things, and so on. So we are investigating this as a way of reaching a larger number of these 140 million farmers. Many of them have smartphones. I mean, they're not unconnected. They are connected in this way. So, that could be very much the way that we reach farmers, the way we communicate with them, the way we understand them, and the way we incentivize them so that we can connect them with markets. Thank you. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Win. I think that was a really, really insightful sharing on how standards and technology can help to make a product more sustainable. I'd like to turn now to Jamie from Lazada Group. I'm sure you have much to share, as Lazada is one of the leading Southeast Asian e-commerce platforms that touches the lives of millions of people. So really interested in what you have to say on low carbon consumption.
Well, thank you very much. I don't have much to say, to be honest. So Lazada is very young. I'm sure, who here knows what Lazada is? Don't mock. A lot of people haven't heard of us. My parents don't know who we are. So we're only 6 years old, and we're only in Southeast Asia. While it's incredibly exciting to be here, we're so very young in this sphere. But we're really excited to be able to participate in things like this, like the Beat Plastic Pollution campaign, which we ran with UN Environment this year. So one of the things that's amazing about e-commerce is that we are neither a supplier nor a consumer. We are entirely a connector between these two groups. This gives us a special opportunity to position ourselves as a communication platform, a way for those who are providing sustainable goods to meet the consumers who want those goods. Inside of Southeast Asia, there's millions of consumers who may or may not be able to communicate in the language of the place that they are living, or they may or may not be able to leave their village to find these sorts of goods. However, we're able to help them find them. And that's really where we see our role, is trying to be that connection space. Actually, I was recently told that we're basically an electrical socket for commerce, that we don't create the electricity and we don't power anything, but we're just there to help everything get along, and I think that's pretty true. So overall, we've just started in our sustainability approach. It's very, very new for us, but we're excited to be part of the panel today and to be part of this overall forum so that we can learn a little bit more about how we can influence consumer choice, and we're excited to push that further. As e-commerce grows, there's only more opportunity for these sorts of partnerships to change the consumer behavior in Southeast Asia.
Thank you very much. I'll come back to you. You're not going to get away that easily. But I'd like to come to Robert from Motion Eco in China. We've heard yesterday about your amazing technology that enables, the recycling of food waste into diesel. So tell us more about that.
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks very much to everyone for being here today, and it's indeed a great pleasure to be here amongst some giants. We're quite a small company. We've only started up over the past couple of years, and we only have a few staff. Our CEO, Liu Shutong, he started the company, and I joined on shortly thereafter, focusing more on policy issues. Are there some slides that came through?
I think you need to wait. Can we have the slides?
We may need to wait. Well, yesterday, if you were here, you probably heard the pitch. I want to explain a little bit about the story behind the pitch. I'll start with a little bit of history and the policy. In 2009, China developed its short and mid to long-term renewable energy policy, where they said there were going to be 2 million tons of biodiesel produced and sold in China by 2020. And so far, nothing has happened, really. And this is one of the issues where central planning didn't work out, because the government agency that was responsible for setting the targets doesn't have anything to do with the main feedstock of biodiesel in China, which is used cooking oil. So used cooking oil has been a pretty big issue in China, politically and socially. All the restaurants in China produce a lot of used cooking oil. It's estimated around 5 million tons per year. And that's quite a lot of oil. If you can imagine 2,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools. Yesterday I used the example of if you turn the Empire State Building upside down and filled it with oil 5 times, that's how much used cooking oil is produced every year. It's a lot. And traditionally, or typically, it's been sort of carted off and recycled back into cooking oil, which creates some health issues. It creates social issues, and it's a black market that is unregulated by government. Now, so and this kind of goes in sort of a not very good cycle. Yeah, you can see some of the pictures here where it's collected in the restaurant, or it's collected out of gutters underground where it's been maybe rotten for quite some time, or it's been exposed to runoff from streets like diesel or oil. And then it's purified, and eventually you can see an oil product that you can't really distinguish from something that might come out of a virgin oil bottle, except that it's full of contaminants, and it's really not good for anyone who eats it. I can use this. So that's a basic introduction, and you can see there that that's sort of the cycle of the black market recycling of oil going on. And what we want to do is to break that cycle so that we can properly work with government regulators at the local level to break that, that vicious cycle and start to recycle locally, at a local level, used cooking oil into transportation fuel that can be used for, typically at this point in time, trucks and buses, and like street equipment or municipal fleets, but in the future, probably in the aviation sector or the marine sector. Right now in China, the demand for diesel is about 120 million tons per year. With some work that we're doing with the NRDC and something called the Oil Cap Project, we're modeling that if China wants to meet its 1.5 degree target sort of responsibilities by 2050, the demand will have to come down to about a quarter of that, so about 40 million tons per year. As I said before, the supply of biodiesel that we can ever provide is probably maybe 4 million tons per year. So we're never going to be a huge segment of that. But the good thing about waste-based biodiesel is that on a life cycle basis, it has virtually no greenhouse gas emissions. We quote a reduction of 90% greenhouse gas emissions for every liter of fossil diesel that is replaced. So every time we replace one of those 120 million tons of diesel that's consumed in China, that's quite a considerable amount of greenhouse gas emissions that we can reduce. Just a little bit about the progress of our company and a little bit about the policy solutions behind this. Well, the first sort of case of local recycling of used cooking oil in China took place in Shanghai. So that's our CEO, Liu Shutong, and we cooperated with Shanghai government. Now, it wasn't the Shanghai Energy Department, it wasn't the Shanghai Environment Department. In fact, it was the Shanghai Health and Sanitation Department that was pushing for something to happen with used cooking oil in one of the districts of Shanghai. And they needed a company or to design a program of collection, recycling into biodiesel, and then bringing it back into the public transport system. So in that pilot project, we were able to fuel and continue to fuel about, more than 100 buses in Shanghai, which, I mean, it seems pretty amazing to us that we're able to accomplish that in a very short period of time. We've done some pilot projects also with commercial truck fleets in China. We did a pilot project with IKEA, and we've been talking with some other companies who are looking for a more sustainable solution for some of their diesel truck fleets. And we're doing that not just in Shanghai, but also starting pilot projects in Nanjing, in Chengdu, and also in Tianjin City. And so by bridging sort of the food waste part, trying to solve this health issue that we experience in China, we are able to bridge that over to the transport sector and reducing greenhouse gas emissions relatively dramatically. And I've been working in transport policy for 12 years, and it's really hard to reduce emissions from the transport sector. Being able to reduce emissions by 1 or 2% across the whole sector is quite an accomplishment, and we would be able to do that if we're able to replace 1 or 2% of the diesel that's consumed in China with waste cooking oil, biodiesel. And so our sort of tagline is that we're turning cities into green oil fields. This can be done. It's a model that needs to be, we've developed that model in Shanghai. We're working on pilot projects in Nanjing and Chengdu, and we think that every city in China can have this model to collect the local cooking oil, use it locally in transportation, or possibly in agriculture in the future, as you know, transportation is going to be more and more electrified. So we'll see that the demand for biodiesel might switch from transport into agriculture or into other forms of transport that cannot be electrified. And yeah, we think it's an amazing opportunity to use the local waste for local benefit. So So that.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Robert.
you.
I think that was really interesting. Very good example of the circular economy in action. How you are taking a waste product and actually upcycling it and making it productive and feeding it back to the economy while slashing emissions. So we've had a really good sharing by all our panelists, a very diverse set of topics. First, we've heard about the sharing economy and how it's disrupted public transportation, and also pre-competitive collaborations in improving the rice as a commodity, and as well as fighting plastic packaging. We've heard from e-commerce, we've heard from food and mobility. So I just want to kind of take a step back and look at business models, because we're talking about disruptive business models, innovative business models that are going to drive that change that we want to see. And perhaps I can go back to Sharon. The sharing economy is obviously something that's been embraced a lot in recent years, but we are also seeing challenges. Mobike, for example, in Singapore just shut down and it's got a lot of bad press about how it left a lot of consumers in debt. And then you also see millions of bicycles being dumped as well. So it's not, a panacea. Perhaps you could share something, on how do you approach the challenges when you're approaching something as new as the sharing economy. And I think, if we go to Slido, there's a question here for you as well about how does the sharing economy business model generate revenue? So obviously we are testing new ground. How do you approach, a new business model like this?
Thank you, first of all, for bringing up this question. I think these are the questions that have been asked quite often. For example, the example you shared with the Mobike recently ceased their operation in Singapore and left in a pretty irresponsible way. I think that really differentiates what Mobike stands for, because since day one, you look at the technology that we develop, the smart lock that we develop, since day one we position ourselves as a responsible operator. So we very much focus on bringing up the turnover ratio of the bicycle. So this will have two effects. First of all, to reduce waste and reduce the fleet size, to make sure that we don't go into like the fleet size war with the competitors. We make sure that we have a decent fleet size to provide to the end users, and we focus very much on bringing up the turnover ratio. So that's the very first differentiating factor that compare with other players in the market. And secondly, we also invested a lot in terms of like managing our fleet properly, and also work in close consultation with local government to provide bicycle lanes and demarcation on the ground, and build more bicycle racks to make sure that users will have enough spaces to park the bicycles, so that to solve the problem of indiscriminate parking. So all this plays a very important part to make sure that the entire industry will be competing in a very healthy environment. I think hopefully that helps to answer the question. We definitely on the path to profitability. By having this smart lock and big data analysis, it helps to reduce the operational cost a lot. The logic is that if we know where the bicycles are, and we know the condition of the bicycle, and we know exactly where to relocate them to, if you look at the back end of Mobike, it's really amazing. So we can map the demand, and we can map over supply. So we know exactly where are the pockets in the city that has more demand but less supply. So make our entire system in a very positive reinforcing way to make sure that we are really on the path to profitability.
So are you making money yet?
On the path to profitability.
I have to ask that question because, I mean, business models will only survive if they're profitable.
If you do the calculation, but also, for example, like business model, revenue model, we've been asked a lot. But obviously that bicycle sharing companies that we charge customers, right? So either you buy Mobike Pass or pay as you go per trip basis. These are the revenues that we collect, right? So if you look at the turnover ratio and times the number of trips that each bicycle is being ridden every day, you will know that this is quite a substantial amount of revenue that we are generating every day.
Okay, thank you. We're going from sharing economy where the promotion of access is more important than ownership, and that's where we see things going. I'd like to perhaps contrast that with e-commerce, Jamie, and because e-commerce obviously, is feeding consumption, and EcoBusiness, which I run, is a media website that reports on sustainable development. We did an e-commerce special report in December, which ranked all the e-commerce companies on their sustainability performance, and what we found is that many of them don't even have a sustainability policy. And then, when we go into the interviews and we start interviewing people, shopping is now seen to be a sport in Asia. I think Alibaba has kind of paved that way for, the crazy consumption that we're seeing. So what kind of role does the e-commerce platform play in promoting responsible and sustainable consumption? I mean, this is the big question.
Well, that's a fair question. I'd like to take a step back and say, we didn't start it as a sport. I'm going to go ahead and say Central might have had something to do with that first. Because overall, we actually find that we're less than 10% of overall shopping in Southeast Asia. The vast majority is still offline, which we're working on, don't worry. But so overall, with the role that we can play, ultimately it's really consumer choice. We, again, are neither the supplier nor the consumer. So when we ran the campaign for Beat Plastic Pollution, one of the things that we really focused on was testing how we would be able to
Tell us more
actually,
about the campaign.
Yeah, so testing how we would actually be able to do this. So we operate in 6 countries, as I'm sure many of you are aware. And so we divided the countries in half, and we did a set of products that was based off of a list provided by UN Environment, saying here are some definitely sustainable products. And then on the other set of countries, we actually opened it up to the sellers to submit products that they believed were sustainable. Of course, we vetted them to make sure that they actually were. But what we were delighted to find is that the sellers actually contributed significantly more products than the lists we were able to actually come up with, providing that there is actually a group of people trying to reach consumers. Because first and foremost, if we don't have somebody supplying it, there's no way we can actually facilitate consumer choice. Secondarily, we did bifurcated testing on our consumers as well. So of course we did our standard on-site where we have the banner at the top of the homepage, and then we have a main campaign page where people can go and see the products. But we also did something called a collection. This collection is basically taking a group of sustainable products and putting them together, and whenever a consumer views this, they are then retargeted with those same products again, giving us a longer life cycle for this campaign. Because ultimately, on average, this is something marketers love to quote, but on average, it takes a consumer 7 views to actually transition into any different choice. So we're giving an automated system, similar to the back end of Mobike, looking at where we could actually drive this demand and where we can show these products to other people, both on our site and also offline. We are working on a few pop-up shops with that. And then also retargeting them across other social media networks and other media buys, really building up that consumer segment to show them that not only was this choice available today, this choice will be available to you every day.
That's really interesting. We have a top question here for you, and that is there an appetite among Lazada consumers for sustainable products, or is it very much niche in the minority at the moment?
Actually, we're not sure, to be honest with you. This is something that actually, I know we're supposed to say that we ran the campaign because we're altruistic and we're looking to influence consumer behavior, which of course we are, but ultimately we're trying to define what this view of the segment actually is. So one of the other things that we did is actually built out the customer segment itself internally at Lazada to see how it could change over time. Because ultimately with any key performance indicator, you have to set that baseline. So for us, this campaign was the baseline, and we hope to really grow this segment over the next year.
That's really great. I hope to hear more from you on that. I know we are short on time, but I just want to ask perhaps any of you to respond to this, and that is, when we think about innovative business models, there very much is having to step out of your comfort zone and actually get your business or your organization to do something that's different. In your personal experience, what has been a success factor that's enabled you to take that risk and then be successful? Because obviously many people try and protect the status quo because that's the easier way to do things. So any of you have a personal reflection on kind of like key challenges and success?
Perhaps it applies equally in a pre-competitive and a competitive environment, but we've found that being prepared to have what start out as quite uncomfortable conversations is very much an important step forwards. For example, having input supply companies, chemical companies talk to non-government organizations about, where do we go on the continuum between, heavily intensive agriculture and organics? How do we develop a way forward that satisfies all needs? I mean, I don't think we're there yet, but we have found a solution that people are kind of prepared to live with. And, gradually we are able to slowly reduce the amount of chemicals used in agriculture. So that's an example where, bringing together different stakeholders who might not have, common views around the table is a really important, in a constructive atmosphere, is a really important message, I think.
Thank you. Anybody else? Edwin?
Well, maybe I will just add to what you just said. From the food sector, I think it's important for the companies to come together on a pre-competitive basis, which is what we're trying to do with the Circular Materials Lab. Because also individually, these companies can do stuff on their own. They're big enough. But they realize that even as big as they are, they can't do it on their own. And even we as a food industry, we can't do it on our own. So we need collaborations at the national level, at the regional level, as well as to go beyond your traditional partners, if you would, to look at the issues and how solutions can then be found.
Thank you very much. With an eye on the time, I'd like to perhaps invite all of you to just kind of wrap up your comments and perhaps, share with our guests this morning that if there's one thing that you'd like them to take away, especially when you think about innovative business models, perhaps your wish list as well. What do you think, that they can do in their own organizations to help accelerate this adoption of business models that can make a difference in sustainable consumption production? Perhaps we start with you, Sharon.
Okay. So I think one message I can share today is that disruptive technology and innovative business model may introduce new challenges. So we need to work together with the users and with the government in a collective manner to make sure that we know where the industry is heading to, and there is a will, there is a way. So we'll always put in effort and bring up new technologies to solve the challenges that we are facing.
Thank you very much. Eben?
I think for us, it's really about collaborations. But more important is, each country within Southeast Asia, even though there's only 10 countries, under ASEAN, you need different solutions, different tailored solutions for them because, if you just look at the flow of plastics into the ocean, different countries have very different reasons how we ended up in the ocean, for example. So we really need to look at policies that will fit each country, but at the same time use, for example, the power of ASEAN and UN environment to then string all this together on a regional basis so that collectively the solutions can be shared, but then you still have it personalized for each country.
Thank you very much. And Win.
I think we're all sort of talking around the whole issue of collaboration as a solution to the world's problems. But I do think that the message has to be, and I don't want to sound cliched, but to embrace new technologies, but to understand the nuances and the impacts of technology adoption in agriculture. For example, impacts on gender are really important when you're introducing new technologies. So you have to walk into and embrace new technologies with eyes wide open. But also then to create incentives for adoption, whether it's in a pre-competitive or a competitive space, using those technologies to create incentives for your consumer base, for your client base. Thank you.
Thank you. Jamie?
Well, so we spent a lot of time here talking about organizations, and obviously that's what we're here to talk about. But I'd like to stress just for one moment that In every company I've ever worked at, all of these programs started with one singular voice, one person who really wanted to drive this change. And I think if you're actually working to make change in the region, in your organization, even in your own personal community, that change has to start with that one strong voice. You have that opportunity to make that choice every day, whether it is the things that you're purchasing, who you're talking to, or driving that change in your organization. It's our opportunity every day, and I'd like for us all to embrace it.
Very well said. Thank you very much, Jamie and Robert.
Well, I guess the thing I want to close on is that sometimes it's not necessarily technology that's a solution to a problem. Sometimes it is really about just having to communicate in the old-fashioned way. And I think, for us, we found that several government departments and levels of government were not communicating very well with each other. And we can just provide a linkage and a business and a little bit of infrastructure to help them to achieve their mutual goals, even when they don't talk to each other. And so sometimes the answer is right in front of you. It's really about talking to the right people and providing the effort and maybe the passion to do what you want to do. And you don't necessarily need patents and networks and server farms or big data even to achieve these things, but you do need a dedicated person or organization to achieve those sustainability goals.
Thank you very much.